this game is just good. I'm so happy. If that's all you were curious about, then there you go. FromSoft seems to be on track to what is quite possibly one of the best games I've ever played. Bandai Namco invited me to play the network test on the PS5 a few days early alongside some other people, and I'm glad they did because I wouldn't have had enough time to do everything if I'd played during the open network test a couple days from now. If you yourself got into that test, try to play for as many of the time slots as you can because you're seriously going to need it. I'd say there's a solid 8 hours of content if you're trying to do absolutely everything. Elden Ring truly feels like the culmination of every past FromSoft game since Demon's Souls, and they managed to make it all fit within the framework of an open world setting. Something that, quite frankly, I'm still shocked they pulled off. If you're looking at this game and thinking that's just Dark Souls 3 Part 2, trust me when I say that it's much more than that. So in this video, I'm going to go over everything. That includes my experience and reactions while playing, an overview of all the new mechanics, plenty of analysis on what does and doesn't work, and even the nitty-gritty on online mechanics and what the PvP meta might evolve into. I'm doing it all. I'm making the possibly unwise decision of trying to fit everything into a single video, so I'll do my best to make sure this doesn't turn into a disorganized mess. Let's do it. The game starts off by giving you the choice between 5 classes. I did ultimately try them all, but I started off with the Bloody Wolf because the armor set on that one is just clearly the coolest looking. I was then immediately thrown into the game inside a dark cave. The beginning sequence teaches you most of the basics and a few new mechanics as well. The very first thing you do is jump down this hole to properly enter the tutorial section. This fall hurts you, and I found this to be an odd choice of introduction since you can actually fall a pretty long distance without taking any damage. And this feels like an unnecessary source of discouraging experimentation with that in the open world later on. Next, I was introduced to a Site of Grace, and these are basically just the new bonfire checkpoints. Some of these also have golden rays coming out of them that serve as a diegetic marker to follow if you're lost on where the main path forward is. So while this game is open world, getting lost isn't really ever an issue. Next thing the cave does is remind you that you have a jump button, and yeah, I cannot stress enough how liberating being able to jump is. Knee-high barriers that your character can't get over are a thing of the past. I was constantly trying to climb on top of everything just for the hell of it. Though we didn't get access to it in the demo, I'm really looking forward to being able to explore areas like the roof of this castle with platforming. It completely revamps the established formula of Souls level designs with an even greater emphasis on verticality. This tutorial cave also explains several of the new combat mechanics. First is that two-handing is different in this game. Instead of just tapping triangle, you now have to hold triangle and then tap R1 for your right hand and L1 for your left hand. This did take a bit of getting used to, but it wasn't too bad. The main reason this was done is because triangle is the new interact button instead of X, and X couldn't be used because it's the new jump button. Next, you can break an enemy's stance to get a critical hit in. This is sort of related to how it works in Sekiro. The two main ways you do this are by doing jump attacks or by doing charged R2 attacks. Speaking of Sekiro, Elden Ring also adds stealth to the Souls formula, and it feels pretty natural. No more needing to slowly tilt the left stick and walk over to an enemy if you want to sneak up on them. The last major update to the combat is the new guard counter move. After blocking an enemy attack with a shield or while two-handing a weapon, you can press R2 to do a very quick and very powerful counterattack. This move is easily one of the best new features to the combat, and it makes defensive playstyles a lot more active than they ever were in past games. Landing these is very, very satisfying. With that, I was done with the tutorial cave, I went up an elevator, and then I was treated to a very Breath of the Wild-esque moment of stepping out into the open world for the first time. I took a minute just to look around and take it all in. This game is seriously beautiful. Even simple moments like looking up at the night sky had me staring. I've heard a little bit of discourse from people complaining that this game doesn't look good enough, but like, no? Are these people unfamiliar with FromSoft? FromSoft's thing has never been to be at the forefront when it comes to pure graphical fidelity. Instead, they rely on superb art direction to carry the visuals of their games, and Elden Ring is no exception with some of the best enemy and environment designs I've ever seen. But yeah, after that, I walked forward and was given a very warm welcome by the first NPC in the game.
Feel free to go off and die in a ditch somewhere.
Cool, thanks man. Then we got Mr. Horse Guy here. As is tradition with early optional enemies in a FromSoft game, this guy will absolutely ruin your day. It was kind of funny watching the game slowly transition from morning to night as I kept dying to this guy. He's tough. He also does a surprisingly good job of keeping up with you if you try to run away and use the terrain or nearby structures to your advantage. Like sure, you can take the high ground, but there's a solid chance he'll just jump up after you. There's also this incredible moment where if you run to the nearby chapel, he'll actually just destroy parts of it as he tries to get to you. This really caught me off guard and was just great. Other big enemies in the overworld have similar interactions with the environment, like how this dragon will knock over trees during the fight. These are small details, but they really go a long way in making these fights feel more grand and dynamic. Ultimately though, despite the best efforts of his pathfinding, you can still use the terrain and the church nearby to fight this guy. I expect this to be true for most of the overworld bosses and mini-bosses, as this is sort of a natural consequence of any open world game with ranged attacks, especially one that lets you jump. In fact, this sort of gameplay with cheesing big enemies outside of boss arenas has been present in every Souls game, so I like looking at it as more of a problem-solving opportunity than a proper boss fight. But yeah, killing this guy rewarded me with my first Ash of War, which is a really cool new system. You can find a bunch of these as you explore, but basically the first thing you need to know is that weapon arts from Dark Souls 3 are back. As a refresher on what those were, basically if you press L2 while two-handing a weapon, or press L2 while holding a shield, you would do a special move that costs FP, or focus points. Back to the Ashes of War you find, these allow you to switch the weapon art of a weapon to the one corresponding to the Ash of War. Now, not every Ash of War can go on every weapon, since there are sometimes restrictions like must go on a slashing weapon, and some special weapons have an unchangeable weapon art, but I'm incredibly excited about the variety this level of customization adds to weapons. It's pretty huge. But that's not all. These Ashes of War also double as a replacement to the weapon infusion system from previous Souls games. So like, if you wanted a weapon with quality scaling or a weapon with lightning damage, you now do that with an Ash of War. And since the two are linked together, this means that if you want a weapon with lightning damage, you also need to be okay with the lightning strike weapon art that comes with it. It's too early to say exactly how much this will affect weapon balance, but I think this will make things pretty interesting. With that out of the way, I went to the church and talked to the merchant NPC inside. I thought he was holding a back scratcher at first, but I think it's actually a sort of bow for his cool looking string instrument. He sells a bunch of useful items, but the biggest one is probably the crafting kit that unlocks the ability to craft items. I didn't do too much crafting, but it's kind of a neat system that encourages you to collect stuff like berries or animal bones as you're out exploring and turn them into items like arrows or a number of consumable buffs. I know some people get nervous when they hear the word crafting within the context of an open world game, but this mainly seems like a completely optional system that mainly serves as an additional way to get items you'd usually buy from shops. After the church, I ran along and followed a path through some trees nearby. By the way, you have infinite stamina whenever you're outside of combat, which is very, very appreciated and needs to be the standard for basically any open world game with a stamina system. I'm looking at you, Dragon's Dogma. I haven't forgotten. Anyway, I continued along the path until I found another site of grace, but this one is special because it triggers the cutscene where you meet Melina, who is the maiden of this game. She gives you a whistle that allows you to call your spectral steed Torrent whenever you want, as well as giving you the ability to level up. And can I just say, finally, thank you, FromSoft. FromSoft, you got it right in Dark Souls 1 with being able to level up at any bonfire. Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, and Dark Souls 3. I think they all have great hub areas, but man, sitting through 2 loading screens every time I wanted to level up definitely got old. Speaking of stats, all of them should be pretty familiar to you if you've played any of the Souls games, with Dark Souls 3 being the closest, but I want to point out a couple notable changes. First, don't make the mistake of thinking that Arcane is the magic stat, since it's basically just like the luck stat from earlier games. It does say that it can affect specific spells, however I expect these to be pretty rare, and I didn't see any during the test that were Arcane based. And second, equipment burden is now tied to strength, so if you want to wear heavy armor, you gotta put points into strength. I actually think this is a pretty interesting change and definitely affects the balance between strength versus dexterity builds. I'm curious to see how that's going to develop in the full release. So yeah, we got our horse and the entire map is open at this point. There is still a main path along this route, but it would be a mistake to beeline it for that before exploring and leveling up more. Here's the map for context, and as you can see, there's quite a bit to explore outside of the main path. So from here, I pretty much just explored for a while. There are camps, dungeons, caves, and overworld events scattered around the entire map. Let's start with this enemy camp nearby. Areas like this are where the new stealth system is the most useful and most fun to play around with. You can sneak around picking off guards one by one, and if you're spotted by a guy with a horn, he'll blow it and alert literally the entire camp. So prepare yourself for some 1v15 situations. On the topic of stealth, the new sleep arrows this game adds are seriously too good. At first I was like, why should I even bother with sleep arrows when I could just backstab an enemy? But that was before I learned of their true power. First of all, the duration is just nutty. I think it's a solid 45 to 60 seconds. Second, you can do maneuvers like this where you sleep multiple enemies at once. Third, it's not just for stealth and you can use it during combat. And fourth, you can even use them on big enemies like giants. They'll fall asleep instantly from just a single arrow. So yeah, do not ignore these things. They're going to be real good in the full game. Now it's time for the horse gameplay overview, and let me just say that I love this little guy. And what can only be described as a truly genius move on FromSoft's part, our horse can double jump. I kind of love this. When I watched the Elden Ring gameplay reveal back in June, this was unironically my favorite feature that they showed off. It's just so fun. Every time I came across a new building or some weird rock formation, you better believe I was jumping all the way to the top. Was there ever anything there? No. Does it matter? No. If you can't understand the primal urge and subsequent satisfaction that comes from double jumping on top of big rocks, all I can say is that you and I are not the same. There are also these horse air jump pads. These are usually placed at the bottom of cliffs and they allow you to jump all the way back up to the top. But what's really cool is how you can actually still control your direction while you're going up them. And what this means is that you can use them to jump the opposite of the intended direction and occasionally land in cool spots. That's enough about jumping. Let's talk about horse combat. When you're riding, it's R1 to swing right, L1 to swing left, R2 to heavy swing right, and L2 to heavy swing left. However, the heavy swings are these neat two-part attacks. For example, with a greatsword, you drag the sword along the ground while holding R2 before you do the swing. But the entire time, it has an active hitbox that lets you do cool stuff like this. Oh yeah, you can also use your bow or cast magic from horseback. This all feels incredibly fluid, and the result is easily one of the best horseback combat systems I've ever seen. And as a little bonus, I found out you can parry other guys who are riding around and knock them off their horse and land a killing blow. You can, however, get knocked off yourself as well, so you gotta be careful about using your horse too much. If you get knocked off, you can get punished hard by this 5-second animation of your character slowly getting up, in which you're vulnerable for the entire thing. I do think this is a necessary compromise for how powerful your horse can be, but it's something to keep in mind. So now that we're riding around and exploring, I want to get into some analysis of why FromSoft's approach to open world design actually seems to work. For a bit of context, part of me was a little nervous about the idea of another open world game. Trust me when I say I have an ungodly amount of experience with the genre, so I know how these games typically go, and I also know why a lot of them miss the mark. I think there are 3 common pitfalls that a lot of these open world games fall into. 1, the worlds often have a lot of empty space. The draw for a lot of these games is their size, but it's usually impossible to fill them up with stuff to care about, so the result is a lot of dead or empty space with nothing of interest in it. 2, what is in these open worlds is frequently pretty samey. Like, cool, I can clear all 50 outposts, but most of these encounters aren't meaningfully distinct and will blend together in your mind. And third, the reward from these encounters and exploring either isn't meaningful, or if it is meaningful, there probably isn't much variety to it. An example of meaningful but with little variety would be the spirit orbs in Breath of the Wild. Surprises are fun, and it's a lot less fun when you know exactly what you'll get from doing something. Now granted, I've only seen a small portion of the entire game, but I think Elden Ring avoids all of these problems. Its world is filled to the brim with handcrafted encounters, and the rewards for all of them was something new and worthwhile. I actually missed quite a bit on my first run through the demo because I was so used to the mentality of avoiding areas that I thought would just be empty. But no, every time there was something to find. I found multiple bosses and hidden caves in areas where other developers would have simply put nothing. I experienced the epitome of this design philosophy when I was riding around on my horse near some random grouping of trees and bushes. I suddenly heard someone talking to me and found an NPC that had been turned into a bush. And just like that, boom, a new NPC questline. FromSoft has always had tons of secrets in their games, but it's seriously impressive as hell to see how they've still carried that over into the open world. Instead of thinking of Elden Ring as an open world game and coming in with those expectations, think of it as a really, really big Dark Souls level with a variety of smaller Dark Souls levels scattered and hidden throughout it. That's basically what this game is, and that's why it works. That classic FromSoft level design is present even in the open sections. Beep, 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 beep. Hold on, I'm getting an important message here. Let's see. It says, power stancing is back, baby. Arguably the best feature from Dark Souls 2 is finally back. Even if you hate that game, which is the wrong opinion by the way, you gotta admit power stancing fucking ruled. And it just works this time. No need to worry about weird 1.5 times stat requirements. As long as 2 weapons are in the same weapon class, you can equip them both and get a dual wield moveset swinging them both at the same time. You got L1 combos, running attacks, rolling attacks, and even jumping attacks for every weapon class. Shout out to the double lance, which I'm already predicting is going to be extremely toxic in PvP. If that's not enough to convince you that combat has really been elevated this time around, there's more that FromSoft added. This time, R1 attack chains now have 4 to 6 distinct animations for each weapon, one-handed and two-handed. For context, in Dark Souls 3, chaining R1 attacks together would just swap between 2 animations, left, right, etc. In Elden Ring, that same sword has a 5-hit chain. Slower weapons like a greatsword have a 4-hit chain, and faster weapons like a dagger have a 6-hit chain. Given that this is the move most people are going to rely on for the entire game, especially when dealing with bosses, it's really cool how we have this extra variety and visual flair now. They still added more though. This game has 2 different running attacks for each weapon depending on if you press R1 or R2 while sprinting. Dark Souls 3 kind of had this since pressing R2 while sprinting was also a different attack, but it's the exact same attack as doing a standing jumping attack, so it doesn't really count. We also have 2 different types of jump attacks, lighter horizontal jump attacks and stronger vertical jump attacks. I mentioned this earlier, but the stronger ones are especially good at breaking an enemy's stance. So all of this combined with the new guard counters and posture system creates a really big step in the evolution of combat since Dark Souls 3. If anyone says that this combat is just Dark Souls 3 again, they're incorrect. Oh yeah, also bow jump attacks. Bow jump attacks. Bows have never felt better in a FromSoft game, and I think it's finally actually viable to primarily rely on a bow if you really wanted to. But wait, I haven't even touched on magic yet, so let's cover that now too. Also for this section, spells refer to intelligence-based magic, and miracles refer to faith-based magic. At a glance, magic isn't a huge departure for how it worked in Dark Souls 3, but there's one very big change. This time, most spells and miracles can be charged by holding R1 or L1 to do a more powerful version of that magic for the same FP cost. Some spells also have a sort of combo system to them item where you can do multiple casts in a row to fire them off more quickly. Just look at some of these, they're so good. Special shout out to this claw miracle. It's absurdly good and works really well in PvP too. Charging it up is also very satisfying. If you're playing in the network test yourself, take my advice and roll a faith build. All the miracles you'll get are so much more powerful than their intelligence counterparts. Hopefully this is representative for the rest of the game with more offensive faith options than ever. I think this game will very likely have some of the strongest and most fun magic out of any FromSoft game. One more thing to cover that's related to magic is the new summoning system. Whenever you're near a rebirth monument, you can summon spirits to help you. These monuments are super hard to spot though, so you mainly have to rely on noticing this icon on the side of your screen to know when you're allowed to summon. These are usually placed near big groups of enemies so that you can summon spirits for the primary purpose of helping split aggro. Also, fun fact, you can use the heal miracle to heal your spirits. If you've ever wanted to play the PvE support class, that's kind of an option in certain areas now. Now, in no particular order, I'm going to list off a bunch of moments that made me go, hey, that's pretty neat. First, we got this shield I found. I was exploring a pretty hidden tower on the edge of the map, and inside I found a snake shield. You can extend the snake and use it as a sort of poison whip on enemies. I love how goofy this is, and I can't wait to see more gimmicky weapons with wild designs. Next, there are these enemies nearby that are just stacks of orbs. They're not only non-hostile, but they're also incredibly weak, so if you decide to attack one, it's pretty easy to just kill it in one hit. With that in mind, I was pleasantly surprised that they gave these guys a bunch of weird attack animations considering that they're basically a non-threat. I think this is where a lot of the charm in FromSoft games comes from, putting lots of effort into something like this that most people won't ever see. When you chase these goats, sometimes instead of running, they just start rolling away. Very cute. This entire carriage encounter is cool, and I like how if you kill one of the giants that's pulling the carriage, the other one just kneels down and can't move anymore. On the beach, there was this strange magic path that was tracing the shape of a triangle really quickly. At first I thought maybe I was supposed to trace along with it, but it turns out it's just an invisible enemy that you have to time your hit to. Lastly, there's a day-night cycle, and the bat enemies seem to be more active at night. This is a nice touch, so I hope there's more time-dependent interactions later on, since this is the only one I noticed for this portion of the game. I'm looking over my notes here, and there's still a few more important new mechanics to cover. So here's another quick list. Fast traveling is now available from almost anywhere on the map, not just bonfires. As long as you're not in a dungeon and not in combat, you can fast travel at any time. Your healing and magic flasks will refill whenever you clear groups of enemies or large enemies like giants. This is a nice way to let you explore the world without constantly needing to restock at sites of grace. Lastly, there are these new statues called Stakes of America that allow you to respawn at them if you happen to die nearby. These are pretty much always near boss rooms if a site of grace isn't already nearby, and the implementation of this mechanic cuts down substantially on the old run back to the boss after dying that the Soul series is known for. I personally really like this change, and it makes retrying tough sections a lot less frustrating. Before I get into the discussion of the online co-op and PvP, I want to summarize the rest of the demo for when I got back on the main path after exploring the open world portion. I worked my way up this windy mountain pass and into a tunnel. This tunnel led to the main boss of the demo, Margit. And oh my god, this guy is rough. He has so many different attacks to learn, and the windows for when you can even hit him are very slim. Fighting him solo is a serious challenge, and I was stuck on him for a while. Even when I did finally beat him, it was in a double KO situation, which fortunately did still count. I'm genuinely curious if this is going to be one of the first main bosses in the full game, because I can already see a lot of people struggling. After the fight, I finally had access to the castle. We got giant birds with knives strapped to their feet alongside giant horrifying arm monsters. And just as I was really getting into it, I reached this ladder to the next section and got a message saying that it was the end of the demo. I had actually almost forgotten that this wasn't the full game, and I'm disappointed I didn't get to do more castle platforming, but oh well. I can wait 3 months, most likely. Probably. And with all that covered, I'm going to spend the next few minutes going over everything related to the online in this game. If you're watching this video, it's probably safe to assume you're familiar with how it works in Souls games, but just in case, basically you can summon other players into your world to help you kill bosses, while other players invade your world and try to kill you. Both of these features have returned in Elden Ring. Finally, after what has been 6 years since Dark Souls 3, we're going to have a FromSoft game with an online community again. It feels good. There's a lot of changes and additions this time around though. First off, to even see summon signs as a host, you need to use a consumable finger remedy item. This isn't too bad since you can craft these yourself pretty easily, but it's something to keep in mind. Now for probably the most controversial change, solo players are no longer able to be invaded by default. If you summon a co-op partner, you open yourself up to PvP, but you won't get invaded if you don't. This change honestly makes sense, but I already see a lot of people being disappointed by it. One of the main reasons I think this was done is because your horse is disabled during online for both co-op and PvP. It would have been a pretty awful experience if you were constantly being thrown off your horse because of invasions. However, you can still get invaded as a solo player if you use this tongue item, which is basically the equivalent of the dried finger from previous games. Unfortunately, and I really hope they change this, you can only use this item to lure in invaders after using the consumable finger remedy item as well. What this means is that effectively you need to pay in order to make the game harder for yourself. And naturally, this is going to lead to very few solo players bothering with this feature. I think at the very least, using the dried finger item should be free. If not, expect to pretty much exclusively invade people doing co-op. But yeah, let's talk a bit more about co-op. I'm really impressed and excited about how there are almost no boundaries with where you can go during co-op, and the whole experience is pretty seamless. Basically, you can go anywhere in the overworld, at least in the portion we had available during the network test, in a single online session. There weren't fog walls blocking us off, and what's even better is that this same freedom extends to the mini dungeons you can find. So for example, you can get summoned in the overworld, explore around with your partner, find a dungeon, and then run through that dungeon to fight the boss at the end, all without any interruptions. It just works. I had so much fun doing this. From wandering around on the road to rolling up on a dragon, it's just good. This is tangentially related, but I want to summarize a really fun co-op experience I had while playing with a friend. I was trying to show them this dungeon entrance I found, but I forgot that it was blocked off and you needed to use your horse to jump over it. Since this was online, however, that wasn't an option since the horse was disabled. This led to the sequence of us trying to jump on the walls, past the obstacle, and eventually we actually found the way. I feel like this wasn't intentional, but I really hope there are more little moments like this in the full game with finding different ways to get to where you want to go via the new platforming options. This was just such a great moment. Getting back on track, I want to go back to talking about invasions because there are two pretty big things to help invaders out this time. First, when invading, the direction of the host will appear on your compass at the top of the screen, but this is only for the invader and the host will have no idea where the invader is coming from. I think this will allow for a lot of potential ambush situations if you plan ahead accordingly. Second, whenever you invade, you get 10 of these phantom bloody finger items on your hotbar. These are only there while you're in the other person's world and will go away once you leave. The description says that they allow you to attempt another invasion of the most recently invaded world. How they actually work is that it allows you to respawn nearby wherever the host is. This is useful for two reasons. The first is that this allows you to get close to your target again if they happen to run off. This seems to be the intended use and was likely put in the game as a way to mitigate the sheer scope of the open world and the potential frustration that could come with that while invading. However, the second use feels a bit unintentional. If you happen to find yourself getting overwhelmed, you can just pop one of the fingers as a means of escaping. This allows you to leave, potentially heal up, and then find the host again. And this is weirdly effective because of how fast using this item is. From the other player's perspectives, you just completely vanish. And I'm not totally sure how I feel about this, as I can see this being abused pretty easily, but honestly, maybe it's fine since invaders will already have it pretty rough. And I almost forgot, one more big online feature is the addition of summoning pools. These serve as areas for people to send their summon signs to so that there's no need to hunt down signs on the ground. Basically, you use either the one for co-op or dueling, and then people will be able to find your sign in one convenient location. The old way of putting your sign anywhere is also an option, but I think this will make the process of finding people to summon a lot simpler. Now with all that out of the way, I can finally get into the good stuff, the PvP meta discussion, the real reason you're here. Please note that this is all subject to change and not everything I'm going to say is 100% confirmed, but I feel pretty strongly about how things are going to work. And I already know how people are going to react to some of this, but bear with me. So first off, Dark Souls 1 Poise seems to be back. Yep. Now I know half of you are excited, half of you are panicking, and half of you have no clue what I just said, but just relax. Let's start by answering the question of what even is Poise. Poise is a stat you could raise by wearing heavy armor, and it allowed you to tank hits from attacks without getting staggered. The reason I mentioned Dark Souls 1 specifically is because in that game, you could tank a hit even if you weren't swinging a weapon, and this meant you could essentially just walk through certain attacks. The result of this is that a lot of people would walk through an attack and get a free backstab, and PvP was kind of a mess. All of this appears to be the same in Elden Ring, with the important note that backstabs are a lot closer to how they were in Dark Souls 3 instead of Dark Souls 1, so you actually can't get a guaranteed backstab from walking through an attack. We confirmed this with testing. Now I want to note that maybe this will work for certain weapons, but at the moment, I don't think you need to worry about people walking through attacks for free backstabs. All in all, I like how this will let us trade hits with certain weapons, and it seems to be pretty functional this time. Okay, next big thing. Guaranteed combos don't seem to be a thing. What I mean is that in past games, usually landing an R1 attack guaranteed at least another R1 to land due to the hit stun inflicted by the first. But no, it's not a thing in Elden Ring PvP. Even with a fast weapon like a katana, we could only get one hit at a time. I definitely need to play around more to form an opinion on how balanced this is, but it does seem like maybe high damage weapons are the way to go if you're only going to get in one hit at a time. There's one more big thing I want to talk about in terms of PvP meta shenanigans, the kick move. FromSoft actually removed the kick from the base moveset of your character in Elden Ring. As a reminder, the way kicks worked in Dark Souls 1 and 3 is that you tap forward on the control stick while pressing R1. This was a semi-decent option for breaking the guard of someone blocking. While they removed it from the base moveset, a super version of it is still in the game via the bare-handed moveset. The game doesn't tell you this, but it turns out the L2 weapon art on your bare fist is this super kick move. And this thing is so strong that it can actually break the guard of a person with full stamina depending on the shield they're using. Once their guard breaks, you have enough time to switch to another weapon and land a critical hit. I can see this being used pretty extensively against anyone using a shield, and I anticipate a lot of new players getting caught by this early on. Definitely something to keep in mind. But yeah, I had a lot of fun just messing around with PvP in general. Fight clubs are once again possible, and let me just say that it's a really strange but good feeling watching a fight on a random hillside in a big open world game. It's just kind of a cool vibe, you know? It's still too early to say for sure how good it will be in the long term, but at the moment, I'm actually pretty hopeful for the PvP scene in this game. Within the community, I think it's pretty evenly split on what people's favorite FromSoft game is. There never seems to be one that's overwhelmingly the majority favorite. I think there's a very good chance that's going to change once Elden Ring releases in a few months. This feels like the culmination of all the games FromSoft has ever made, and I think it's the game they've always wanted to make but never had the proper resources or time to until now. In case you couldn't tell, I really liked my time with the network test, and I seriously can't wait until I have the full game. It's not often that a super high profile game lives up to the hype, but fuck, I think Elden Ring just might.